Hello everyone, welcome to Benevolence, where kindness matters and all are welcome to the table. I'm your host, Ceci Diaz, and first I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in, liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. Your support really means a lot to me, so keep tuning in because I know that you're going to leave empowered and blessed. You are tuning in to episode 2, and the title of episode 2 is called Suicide, an Epidemic. And today I have a very, very special guest, and we have been friends for a very, very long time. She is truly my twin because we love all the same things. We've done ministry and life together for the past 8 years, and she's been a blessing to both me and my family. So without further ado, we have Tiffany Gonzalez joining me at the table today. Hey girl.
Hey girl, thanks for having me.
No problem. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you joining me today at the table, talking about something that is very, very sensitive to me, and it's also it's actually very sensitive right now. It's pretty much
many of us.
Yeah, to many of us. So before we begin, tell me a little bit about yourself. Just a little bit of everything.
Okay. So again, hello everyone. My name is Tiffany, and first and foremost, Ceci, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm so excited for what God is doing in your life and in this ministry. And so everyone out there, make sure to subscribe, like she said, because I know that this is a place where you're going to be definitely encouraged and a place where you can get a lot of resources for life and a lot of wisdom. So thanks again. But like Ceci said, we have been friends for 8 years. I have been married for 6.5 years to my wonderful husband, Kevin. And I am currently studying for my master's. I am a marriage and family therapist, or in the works, I should say, and trained in mental health. And I'm currently an intern at a local church here in Orlando where we provide services for both the community and those within the church.
Awesome. Thanks. One of the many reasons why you're one of my first special guests here at the table is because we're hitting the topic of suicide and depression, and I feel that you are out of all my friends and people that I know, I feel that you're the most knowledgeable. And because you have, you've encountered clients through your internship and things of that nature that, have gone through this, and you have seen the good, the bad, the ugly on the therapist side, and me going through suicide and depression. I think that this is something that needs to be, it needs to be a conversation. We need to talk about this. If you aren't aware of my testimony and you aren't aware that I did go through this, you can tune into my first episode, which is a letter to my past self, you will get a very detailed just account of my life and everything that I've gone through. So you can tune into episode 1. But if not, I did personally go through a time in my life at the age of 19. I went through a time of depression, and I did attempt to take my life. The attempt did not fall through. So I'm still alive. I'm still here today to testify that I'm here, and I know that my story, although for many years I was always embarrassed of my story, for many years I was just kind of didn't want to talk about it. It's happening so much, in these past few years. There's just been such an increase in suicide accounts and depression, and people are just coming out and talking about it, that I felt that I needed to speak about it, and I need to tell people my story so that they know that they're not alone. A disclaimer and a reminder before we begin our conversation, that our conversation is simply opinionated. It's very sensitive too, but it's very opinionated. It can be biased at times, and basically this is a topic that can be controversial, but we're including facts, we're doing research, and we're simply just having a conversation about suicide and how many people from the church itself are dealing with it. So we're going to cover all aspects of suicide and depression. So continue listening on. But one of the main questions that I have for Tiffany, what is going on in the past, few years, that it's such a hot topic right now. We'll talk eventually on culture and on the environment, and we'll talk eventually of mental health, but what is one of the main reasons why suicide is just, just so strong? It's an epidemic. We're hearing about it so much in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've kind of talked about this, from time to time prior to us recording this, and it's one of those questions where I just feel that there really isn't a specific answer that we can give. I think understanding that, like we talked about, or just briefly you mentioned, there are many factors. So, but taking it back, it's understanding that in all reality, there's not one reason why someone may take their own life, and there are certain factors that can increase those risks of people taking their lives. So it really goes beyond just that question, and every story and every person that does deal with either suicide ideations or depression, there are several reasons why. And so I think that those are like the type of questions and conversations that we need to really talk about, because we'll never really have a final account as to why people are doing it, because everyone, again, their story is different.
Mm-hmm. I believe a lot of it has to do, with like the culture. Like right now, we're just consumed with like social media right now. Right. Like social media has taken over like our lives, pretty much. And I can account like on many times, and this could be a totally different, another conversation that we can have, but social media has turned into something that can either make you or break you. Like I've had moments where I'm having a fantastic day, and then when I get home and I'm looking at social media and I see other people's lives, and don't get me wrong, I know that, the life that they're portraying on social media isn't the true reality of what they're living. But because it's so glamorous, the filters, the clothes, where they're at, like it can completely turn your day upside down. Like, and you can feel so depressed.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. Like there's like, even as a wife and a mother, the mom blogs and all that, like you start to compare yourself to other people, and you can just really dig a deep hole of like feeling bad about yourself, and then you're just not appreciating what God has given you. Like I have a wonderful husband, I have a wonderful daughter, I have a house, I have a job, and then you can like for just 10-15 minutes you can like just
get lost in their world.
Yeah, absolutely. So
it's
do you
so
think
true.
that has, like, is that something major of why people fall into depression and all of that?
Yeah, I definitely believe that social media is a big part of the problem. And again, I include myself in this. I've been where you're saying. I've gotten lost behind the one moment. And in all reality, when we think about it, it's like you're on social media and you realize, or I guess you forget to realize, that this is like one picture or one video, one snippet of someone's 24 hours, right? And we tend to, like you said, we glamorize it, we make it to be something that maybe it's not. And, what are we missing behind that photo? You know, what's really going on in that person's life?
And they probably didn't even take it that day. They took it probably
months
a month ago.
Who knows, right? And it's just one of those things where you stay in awe of what the power of our mind is. We somehow, like you said, we'll forget the blessings that we have. We'll forget the opportunities that we're currently living, and maybe the things that are coming ahead of us that are great experiences in our own personal life. And it's kind of sad that that's where it's gotten. You know, it has now taken a big part of our lives, and it's definitely something, social overuse of social media. The conversation you and I were having just yesterday was, even again including ourselves, but we're so tech savvy now that we don't tend to call each other. It's everything is through text and through emails, and it's just, you lose that lack of conversation, that lack of interaction with each other. And I think that a lot of the problems can definitely say that they're stem from that, because how are we really understanding how that person is? If I'm looking at you in your eyes, I can see at times if there's sadness, if there's joy. And so if it's all about, communicating through devices nowadays, I'm really missing a big part of who you are. And I think that has to say a lot and stand for a lot in today's society and generation.
I agree. And a lot of it, moving on, it could be environmental. And I know that you have a little bit more information on the mental health side of it and the environmental side of depression. When I was going through my depression, I was hopeless. Like, I literally felt alone. I felt like I couldn't go to anyone. I couldn't turn to my parents. And I had already pushed away so many friendships, like, that I felt like I couldn't even reach out to them,
Right.
So what are other aspects of depression that we can, just be aware of? Because ultimately, like, a big percentage of that does lead, to attempts of suicide or thoughts of suicide and all of that. So,
Right.
What do you think about those things?
Yeah, I definitely think that, we have to understand that a lot of times people that are more likely to commit suicide or do commit the act have some form of mental health disorder. So, that's a big percentage of people that do want to hurt themselves. And so it's definitely important for us to have that awareness and understand that depression is one of the top risk factors. So these are things that we have to really become aware of, understanding the symptoms that can vary, from anywhere from mild to severe. And these things can include, sadness and loss of energy and, feeling worthless or guilty. And so when these types of symptoms then become, they go from mild to severe, that's something that we have to, try to be aware of, if whether it's ourselves or those who we love and are closest to, what are these changes and fluctuations that are occurring that we need to somehow be aware of so that we can help. But I think, like you mentioned, as far as environmental things, that's the social loss, like we mentioned, being exposed to suicide, harassments or bullying, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but also that biopsychosocial cause, which is including things like I said, the depression or being bipolar, schizophrenia, having anxiety, which I know that that's something that you've gone through in the past, is having those severe, moments of anxiety where you're not even able to control them. So, and then that also goes into the sociocultural, like you said, difficulty of seeking support. These are people that are just, they're unaware of how to cry out for help.
Yes.
And sometimes they're so overlooked even when they do cry out. So those are definitely factors that fall all into that category of, you asking, is it an epidemic? These are things that are happening and it's happening more often than we'd like for it to happen. But there's also that lack thereof knowledge that we have to, and again, I include myself, how are we becoming aware of these things? What conversations are we starting so that we could have the knowledge and reach out to these people who are being affected?
Yeah, I agree. Last month, we had 2 cases. We had the recent suicide of Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain within days of each other. And it's easy to say, but they had it all. Why did they take their life? And even a person that has dealt with suicide, in my past, it was hard for me to understand someone who had it all, or at least, had the wealth, you know what I mean? And had, people following them and just, they had people around them, they took their own lives, and it was hard for me to understand that. So, it's a huge misconception, that these people have it all, because even the guy from Lincoln Park, and I forgot his name, but, his wife had recently showed a video of him playing with his kids, the day before, a few days before, or whatever the case may be. And he seemed happy, he seemed like he had it all. He was, with his kids. And it's like, when you're in the state of wanting to take your life, you don't think about those things. You're not thinking about your family. You're not thinking about the consequences of that. And ultimately, when you do become a victim of suicide, you're leaving behind a family who, they need answers. Exactly. Like, they had no clue, or maybe they had an idea that you were suffering or you have depression or anxiety, but they don't have answers. That you're leaving, your family behind with more of a devastation, than you ever thought. You're thinking that, ending the problem, ending my life will make things better, but you're actually making things worse, because you're leaving behind a family, who could have done something, but they didn't know, or they just didn't know what to do, you know. So
and I think just to kind of write on that you're saying, it's also, we had talked about Robin Williams, and it's like the irony behind his life is just, it kind of like keeps you, it takes you back, you know. This guy was a comedian. Like, his purpose in life was to bring laughter and joy to our lives.
Exactly.
And the way he, you know, he felt the need that he had to end his life.
Exactly.
You know, and that's one of the things where it's just, these aren't things that we can just, you know, not talk about.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And it's just so sad to say, like you said, these people have it all, at least in our eyes,
in
right?
our eyes.
At least on social media, it seems that way. And they're in just as much pain as us, people that don't have half of the resources or bank accounts, or, you know, but we can have the same pain. And I think that that's something to understand, that no matter the person, no matter your economic status, you understand that pain is pain, and no one is immune from something like this.
Exactly. I agree. So moving on from that, like, one of my greatest fears as a mom is not being able to catch the warning signs of suicide. You know, in my story, unfortunately, I was living in college during that time. So, you know, I was going through a really rough relationship. The relationship, you know, we had split. And then from there, I felt like I didn't have anyone. I didn't have any friends.
Right.
I didn't have I couldn't go to my parents, because already I had lost so much trust, you know, from my parents, because I had lied so much that it was hard for me to go to them, because I knew that they were already disappointed in me for the things that I have done, that it was just very hard for me to go to them and tell them that, look, I'm depressed, you know, and I need help. So as a mother, like, I'm afraid that my daughter, you know, is gonna suffer in silence, you know, and that's every mother, every father's fear, that their child is gonna go through this. You know, the countless stories that I've heard of children, 10, 11 years old, who give into this act of suicide, and the parents are like dumbfounded. Most of them had no idea that their son or daughter, you know, was dealing with this. And a lot of other cases had been because of bullying and things, and because, you know, the story goes on and on.
Exactly.
But what can you tell us about, like, some of the warning signs that we can look for?
First and foremost, sometimes, even as an individual, you know, so it's you, if you're anyone who's listening out there who you're kind of going, or you're feeling certain things that I'm going to mention, again, also the family members, these are all things for all of us to just kind of be aware of. But I mean, anything along the lines of feeling hopeless or trapped, feeling alone, anxiousness, agitated, they're finding no reason to want to continue to live. It could be even a joke. We mentioned that at some point we've come across people in our life who are just like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed, I could just die. Or, you know, speaking lightly of the situation. Yes. These could all be cries for help.
Yes.
No matter how insignificant they may come across to us, that could be a form of someone crying out. And I think that, you know, just kind of being aware of mood swings, and if they're indulging in more alcohol or drugs, you know, substance abuse, these are the types of things that we have to be aware of. The people that are closest to us, I would hope that at some point, and again, it's not the case always, because how many times have we heard of people who are living a secret life, right?
Exactly.
So those are the things that we can only do so much, and we can hope to say that we'll be able to recognize and pick up on these symptoms or signs that may kind of come up. But, you know, those are all types of, you know, things generalized. Obviously, you know, there's a longer list, but a big part of it are these people are feeling that they're just maybe not fitting in, right, with society, or they're just so lonely, and no one understands their pain.
Exactly.
So those are definitely things that we want to kind of keep a lookout on.
One quote, like recently to when Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain's suicide, that it just occurred like in the same week. Like one happened on a Tuesday, the other one happened on a Friday. Someone had put up like, check on your strong friends, check on your quiet friends, check on your happy friends, check up on your creative friends, you know, check on each other.
Yes.
You know, check up on the people that you love, you know, because you just have no idea that they're going through this. I don't know why, because now I'm trying to like look back at that time, But I ultimately did not feel that I had not one person who can understand me. And that is what pushed me. And then also there was like triggers that had occurred that earlier morning, you know, that just brought extra pressure to the situation. You know, that I felt that I could not, I was in such deep sorrow that I didn't want to live anymore. The pain was too unbearable for me that I'd rather take my life to just end the pain. And at that moment, I was just not thinking of my parents. I wasn't thinking about anything but just getting rid of the pain. Another question, when we see those warning signs, like, what do we do? Because like I've said so many times, like, I don't want my daughter suffering in silence. You know, I don't want anyone suffering in silence. You know, and when I start to see those warning signs, what can I do to help, you know? And what if I don't see them? Because that's the scary part there. Like, I think that's what scares me the most. That I don't see them and I don't catch that sign, you know, on time. You know, so what can we do with that? I
think, you know, first and foremost, we have to create the space for these types of conversations. So I think that sometimes, and I can personally say that I didn't grow up ever learning or talking about mental health issues.
Yeah,
you know, never.
I didn't know what that was until the other day. Like, honestly, in the last maybe 3 to 4 years, I started to hear the word mental health. I didn't know what that was.
Exactly. So I think that it's one of those things that have somehow become it was a taboo, right?
Yeah.
We don't talk about it in the home. I didn't learn about it at school, to be honest. At least, I mean, you know, outside of me going to school for my master's in counseling, but
it seemed kind of frowned upon too. Like if it was a sin to be depressed, or if people knew that I was sad, they thought I was crazy. Because that's how I felt sometimes too. And
I think in the context of Christianity, I feel that the perspective that I saw growing up was, it might have been like you were possessed or somewhat of it was a demon, or you know. So it's like, let's pray let's pray this out of you, and that's not the case. And I think that it's that you know, the ignorance behind it. And I include myself, because I was very much unaware until I began to study this and understand the severity of it and the realness of it. But it's creating that space, again, for this conversation to occur. And so I know you always mention that you want an open relationship with your daughter, where you're able to, you know, have her just feel comfortable to come talk to you about anything. And I think that that's honestly the biggest thing, and that's what's going to make the change in her life. And with you recognizing and seeing things, God forbid, right?
Yes.
So, but just to kind of give us an idea, you want to obviously begin conversations with, you know, a family member or a friend that you notice are starting to act differently, or are considering suicide. You know, ask them questions that are non-judgmental. So we want to make sure that we're creating a space where these people are, you know, our family members, our friends, where they're able to feel comfortable to come to you and say, this is what I'm feeling. And no matter how, you know, how deep or how surface their answer may be, or their conversation may be, that we're not putting or overlooking those feelings aside and somehow tricking them to change their mind or change their answer. Like, whatever they say, it's relevant enough for us to say, we're here to help no matter what.
Exactly.
So not overlooking or belittling what they're crying out for at that moment.
I agree. Something that just came to my mind, culture. Like, what about the Hispanics who are dealing with this? Like, you know, it seems like, especially if you came from, you know, like you came from the islands, or if you came from South America, that's like not common. Like, you know, and you would think that like your grandmother or your mother, if she's like hardcore, you know, Hispanic or Latina or Latino, like you'd be frowned upon for that, because that's not something that happens to Hispanics. Like, I feel like culture also has...
We somehow exempt ourselves from
this. Yes. That they think that, you know, suicide and depression only happens to Anglos, you know what I mean? Or also African Americans, like what happens, like minorities are suffering through this, and we have this like misconception that it only happens, to Anglos, and it happens to the minorities itself.
No one is exempt.
No one is exempt.
And that's definitely where the problem is. It's we're not having these conversations as parents. Like you said, it could be generational, where our parents were unaware, so they didn't know how to carry those conversations or start those conversations with us, and so on and so forth, So it's definitely something that has become more apparent. It's now at the forefront of a lot of, what our kids nowadays, and I say kids, with my nephews and nieces, I know that these are things that they're young, but these are things that are already being talked about in elementary.
Exactly.
You have kids at that age that are, already talking about that they're feeling depressed, and it's not to discount that, because they very well could probably be.
Yes.
But, what are we doing about this?
Exactly.
Are we just saying, well, as long as it's not my child, as long as it's not my family member, I'm okay with it? But what are we doing beyond what we're seeing, and how are we contributing to society, and communities, and especially those communities that don't have the financial resources to be able to go to therapy or have medication?
So what do you do?
How are we aiding these people?
Exactly. And what age do you think is, I know that every family is different, so I guess I'm going to be answering my own question, because probably listeners are out there, that are parents or future parents, and they're probably like, what age is a good age to start talking about this? But I guess it all depends on the maturity of your child.
I think it all depends. Yeah, I think that that's a factor, definitely. But I honestly feel that we shouldn't wait to a specific age, to bring up certain topics. And we're talking about mental health, but we can also say, the topic of sex. Do we want to wait till our children are exposed to certain things in middle school? Do we want to wait for other children to teach our kids about these sensitive topics, about these very important topics, about these topics that can change their life? I think it's time for us to really start taking initiative and saying,
absolutely,
we as a family are going to start talking about these things early on. I think as a parent, we have, and I say we, but again, I'm an aunt. It's one of those things where you're just like, we want to educate them at least early enough where they have some form of awareness. Obviously, you're very wise about how you talk about these things, but we shouldn't wait for outside resources to teach our kids about what they're going to encounter at some point in life.
I agree. A lot of it transitioning into the next thing that we're going to pull is 13 Reasons Why.
Right.
A lot of these kids, they're watching this show at such a young age, and they're being introduced to suicide just by watching the season. A lot of these kids, they come from tight-knit families and things like that, and they just don't talk about it. But now, we have shows like 13 Reasons Why who are showing, oh my goodness, everything. Even season 2,
very
and very explicit. I personally, as someone who has dealt, with suicide attempts in the past, and also someone who continues to suffer from anxiety every now and then, and like I said, I always point to last year, because last year was my worst year, but this year, like, God has completely redeemed me and has completely transformed me, so I praise God for that. But last year was very hard for me, and when 13 Reasons Why came out, like, it's like I wanted to see it because it was like the trend, like it was the thing to see. But then after I learned that in the last episode, you actually see the girl actually, commit the act, I felt in my heart, because I have been, I guess dealing with it throughout all my life. And it's not that I wanted to take my life from when I was 19 on. It's just those thoughts come in your head, and they bring,
it's somewhat always going to be a part of your story.
It really is.
And so you have to be the one in charge. You have to have the knowledge of, how am I going to live the rest of my life? Obviously, that will always be somehow, again, attached to your story. So it's you protecting yourself.
Exactly. And I knew that if I would have watched that, it would have triggered, I don't know what it would have triggered, but I knew that it wasn't something that I should watch. For instance, I have, like, I think it was like a year or two after I got married, I was just home one day, and there was a recent suicide, there was a victim of suicide, and they announced it on TV. So what I did, because I was curious as to know how she did it, I went online and I kind of Googled her name, and then I kind of just, wanted to know a little bit more information as to why she did it and things like that. And, like, I'm not gonna lie, like, as I was reading the article, just kind of like a very, very bad energy, like, evilness. Like, I could just feel just a darkness come into the room. And obviously, because we are Christians, we know that it's the enemy, who takes advantage of those situations. And my room, I felt like I was jumping into a pool of water, like a jello, where all I could hear was nothing. And I remember, just looking to the side of my room. My master bedroom had like a little nook with like just kind of like a rack where you can just hang clothes there. And I had nothing there because I had my makeup in that area. And I remember looking at it, and I had high voltage ceilings in that apartment. So I remember that in my brain, I was like, oh, that would be like a good place to hang yourself.
An opportunity.
Yeah. And it wasn't that I wanted to do it, but it was like I looked and boom, it was like right there. And there had been other accounts where, I would look at something and I would have those feelings. And it's not that I wanted to act on it, but because that's just something that I struggle with. You know what I mean? So I knew that because of those experiences, I knew that I couldn't see 13 Reasons Why. So tell us your thoughts.
So I'll be honest, again, and this is, I'm always laughed about this, but I'm not a big TV buff, at least not in the season in my life, as I'm currently pursuing my master's, and I have little time to do so. But I actually learned about 13 Reasons Why amongst some colleagues in my school, where it came up, and there was much concern and a lot of negatives that came up, and just the conversation was started within our classroom, and I became a little intrigued to understand what exactly was the negative connotation associated with the show, because I know at some point, working with clients, like you said, I may have an adolescent that comes in at some point that will say, God forbid, due to this show or due to something along the lines of what I've seen in this show, I became curious, and I just wanted to know what exactly I was going to confront. So I have seen it, and I've done a little bit of research and just trying to understand what exactly the producers, the writers of this show were trying to display or portray with having these scenes that are very graphic.
Yeah.
I think that
from what I've heard.
From what you've heard, right. Yeah. And I think it's really hard because the first season, from what I can remember, I don't believe that there was any type of PSA, like public service announcement, prior to you watching the show. So if there's a young child going in, or even a middle schooler, high school, anyone, period, knowing what they're going to, unaware of what they're going to confront in that episode, that's very difficult because we don't know how that would affect that person.
Exactly.
And I think that that's obviously one of the bigger things that's happening with this show is there was a lot of talk about the fact that although from what I've gained knowledge from the producers from this show, and Selena Gomez being one of them, and suffering herself with I believe it was depression, she wanted to bring awareness and conversation, and they have now in season 2 created another short series called, I believe it's Beyond the Reasons Why, and it talks about why they chose to put certain things in this show and in this series, even if they're very sensitive and graphic, like we mentioned. But a lot of it, even despite the negatives and the positives, they said that a lot of what they wanted to do was create room for a conversation to occur. Okay. And I think that obviously we've realized that a lot of the graphic moments, the suicide moment, a lot of people can say that it seems somewhat glamorized, especially for certain age groups.
Yes.
Especially for people who aren't aware of the severity of what suicide is.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where the ball is dropped.
Yes.
Where, from what I'm understanding and from what I've seen, is that there's not much mental health associated within the show. So Hannah Baker is the girl in the show that does commit the act of suicide. There's bullying going on, sexual harassment and things of that nature. She goes to her school counselor and nothing is done. So there are a lot of things that ethically would, hopefully in a real setting, things would have been done differently, or we would have understood that she may have dealt with depression, that she was feeling, certain feelings and things like that. So the show kind of skims over that. It's kind of surface. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you're kind of seeing this graphicness of her cutting herself. And so I think that lack thereof of awareness is what we're kind of missing. And I include myself as a therapist, this is what we would have ideally, if you're creating a conversation, we want to have that foundation and that depth so that people can walk away being more knowledgeable of what to expect if they're encountering any of these things, as opposed to just seeing, again, a glamorized visual of suicide. Mm-hmm. But I think that now, because of the stir that it's caused, the season 2 does now have warning before you watch it. It does, at the end of an episode, you're now having resources that are offered. The National Prevention line of suicide is on there, so they are trying. They're hearing. They're hearing the roar, and so they're trying to implement things. But again, watching the short series Beyond the Reasons Why, they understand and they hear everyone, but again, their sole purpose is not to either be associated with a positive or a negative. It's to create a conversation. And so I think as parents, as adults, and hopefully just as maybe a mentor of younger people in our lives, we have to take those steps and protect those kids, right? Yes. Or people who, like you said, even yourself, an adult that knows her triggers, had to take the step and say, this isn't safe for me to watch. Exactly. And so we have to, be aware of those things. How are we blocking? Are we putting certain blocks on certain shows for certain people or for kids, Yeah. What are we doing to protect ourselves? And I think that's one of the important things that we have to look out for, and people understanding what their triggers are, because it could be today 13 Reasons Why, and tomorrow it could be another show that talks about another mental illness, another another act that's graphic that we feel that is not appropriate. Yes. But unfortunately, we can't control what Hollywood puts out there. And so it's definitely important for us to be aware of kind of what's going on in our surroundings.
Yeah, I agree. We want to talk about the church and suicide, because the church seems to have never mentioned suicide, and it seems like a taboo topic. No one really talks about it. It's kind of frowned upon. But we know that there are many people struggling with depression and suicide in the church. So why do you think that the church doesn't mention anything about suicide?
Yeah, I definitely think, like we mentioned earlier, that even with, just the generations prior to us, they may have not been really aware of certain things. Like you mentioned, Hispanics, Latinos, sometimes just culturally, we're not exposed to certain things. And even if we are, again, we may portray it to be different. And especially if God is a factor of it, sometimes it could be so spiritualized instead of realistic.
Yeah, because it was, like you had mentioned earlier, like if I was depressed and I wanted to commit suicide, it's a demonio, it's a demon. And they were just gonna pray it out until, it got out. They were gonna put oil on my head and they were gonna just rebuke it. Right. And, we were raised like that. Right. We're Pentecostals, so
and we understand the power behind
exactly, that, and there is power, but
but there are some things that are just, it's again with our physical health, we understand that God can heal our bodies, but then there's that reality of that there are some things that you're just gonna have to take medication for the rest of your life if that's the way it is, or there are things that you have to change your food, the food habits that you have to change your exercise routine. There are things that are just gonna be real enough where we have to understand that we cannot just pray things away. Like we have to take responsibility of our temple, like God says. So we have to also have that awareness and understand that not everything is a demon. Not everything is just going to go away because we're praying about it or fasting about it.
Yes. So what do you have for that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's important for us to understand that, a lot of times we want the Word of God to be very black and white, but like we said, there are moments in the Bible where it's a little, we kind of have a little gray area where we're just like, God, what exactly do you mean? But I think that with suicide, it's important for us to understand that, especially in 1 Corinthians 3:16 and 17, it says, do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him, for God's temple is holy and you are that temple. So understanding that, who we are, like God paid a price for us, and again, and that's in 1 Corinthians 6:19. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. So, we have to think about that too. As Christians, as believers, I know that not everyone out there will come across this scripture, right? But we see as Christians that the Bible says, it is pretty much black and white, that our body is the temple of God, and destroying it, that's almost like, bringing sadness to the Lord, something that he died for, our life, God died for that, paid a price for it. And so it's really understanding the importance behind that scripture and what it's saying, and understanding that God created us for more than death. Exactly. So in Jeremiah 29:11, it talks about, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you future and hope. And I think that that's something that, with suicide, people associate themselves with feeling hopeless and feeling alone. And so it's understanding that in the midst of all of that, it's a lie from the enemy, that God does have a plan for our future. God does have a purpose. From the moment that we were in our mother's womb, as the word of God says, there is a reason for us to live. There is a reason for us to do life with people. And that's the importance, Ceci, of us, creating this conversation and movement within the church.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people don't think about it, but, suicide is equivalent to murdering. You know what I mean? It's murdering yourself, right? And as Christians, we easily forget. And we can all testify. Yeah, even we go through so many things in our lives, and it doesn't have to be with anxiety. It doesn't have to be with depression. It doesn't have to be with suicide. Just our walk with God is just so difficult at times. And we go through these dry seasons that we forget that God has a plan, and we forget that we have a hope and a future. Amen. And that right now we don't see the big picture, but God sees the big picture. And it's scary to think that, with all your emotions and all your feelings, like in just a matter of a second, you can take your own life and think that that's gonna end the pain. End it all, and it's not. You leave a lingering pain forever for those who love you the most, who stay behind carrying your memory forever. Yes. There's so much more pain associated, and I think that that's something that a lot of times, we overlook that part of it, you know? And I include myself again in understanding that and how the mind works and the things that we believe. But it's that moment that you release yourself from this world, you leave so much more pain behind. And I think that that's the important thing to remember. Yes. Also, just always remember that please don't suffer alone. Please don't suffer alone. If you or someone is dealing with suicide or depression, please know that you are not alone and that there is help. And you can call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255. And you can also plug into a church or look up your nearest mental health facility where they can help you with screenings and or resources. We follow Christ, so we know, and if we invite you to know Jesus, give him a chance, and I promise you that he is going to fill up that void. He is going to take that sadness away. And I know that if you just come to Christ and you give him a second chance, or you reconcile your life to him, I know that he has a plan and a purpose for you. So don't give in. Suicide is not the answer. And you have so many people who love you and are surrounded. And sometimes we fix our minds to thinking that we're alone and we just have to suffer this alone. But there's so many people who care for you and who are there to help you. So please make sure that you get the help that you need. And if you know someone who needs the help, please don't overlook them. check your good friend, check your, your funny friend, because even the funniest people can be so sad inside, and it could be their outlet of like, just gaining approval from everyone so that, they can feel better about themselves. But be there, check on your friends, check on your family, because you just never know. And, I just want to thank you, Tiffany, for joining me at the table.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And I hope that today's conversation has provided you with knowledge, resources, and gives you a new sense of awareness. And let's make sure that this conversation does not end here. Also, please make sure that you follow Tiffany on Instagram at NeverStopLoveBlog. And this is basically just a social media outlet from Tiffany and her husband Kevin, where they've created a movement on the importance of fighting for your marriage. So thanks again, Tiff, for being
so
here.
Much for
I love you so much.
I love you too.
Once again, I want to thank you so much for tuning into Benevolence, where kindness matters and all are welcome to the table. Please continue to spread the word and subscribe, and stay tuned for next Monday's episode 3. See ya.
Bye.